I am fed up. I figured out arguing with random Hasan stands on Twitter was kind of fruitless at this point, so this video will help summarize the counterpoints I had to argue with them in hopes other people understand how bad this is. Also, this should be a very late continuation in detail of a previous video we did on the BreadTube streamer sphere, so I recommend watching that first if you didn't. This will pretty much go in detail on the usual defenses of Hasan Piker, as well as deeper picture of what Hasan really is and what he intends to do with his leftist streamer career, since not many people are willing to realize he's basically a conman and a grifter, and at every level who's using the left-wing sphere for profit. Hasan Piker is one of the biggest Twitch streamers in the world, period. He's well known for kickstarting his rise to popularity, especially during the COVID lockdown times, where he got a massive surge of viewership and following from people who had nothing better to do in their homes. Hasan rubs shoulders with the Young Turks, especially with his uncle Cenk Uygur, who I've been told Hasan doesn't necessarily agree with, but maybe someone has too much Piker dick to ride. Hasan has a huge influence in the leftist content creator sphere because of his immense following, and this is a huge detriment to the leftist sphere because of so many reasons, including, but not limited to, exploiting unpaid labor by stealing content, boasting a luxurious lifestyle that is misrepresenting of his pretend views of socialism, having no idea what he's talking about in terms of politics, and being possibly a soon-to-be detonator of dire legal and political consequences that will affect anyone too poor for lawyers. And you can imagine that broad category does not include him. Often, when it comes to the criticism he receives, he will deflect criticism and have an absolute lack of self-awareness enough to be considered in bad faith, despite the fact that he thinks his critics are acting in bad faith. Take, for instance, the response he did to people like Dark Paper IU and Willie Mac Show, where he claims these critics come in bad faith, but responded in such a bad faith, Hasan kept making attacks on their characters. This is also a pattern of behavior amongst Hasan's fans, who will often engage in goalpost shifting or whataboutism. If it wasn't clearly evident for any Hasan viewer who stumbles upon this video, or even Hasan himself, the point of this video is not to rage bait in bad faith or negative engagement or critique in bad faith. But the point of this video is to shed light on Hasan's wrongdoings and how this bourgeois leftism is a detriment to our cause, whether you are an anarchist like me or you're generally a socialist or anything left-leaning. It is also not as much of an attack of his character either. This video is more of a criticism of Hasan's patterns of behavior, even though I don't expect the same level of good faith criticism from Hasan towards me or this video either way. Hasan has a huge impact on the leftist political scene because of his immense following and power, but a general trend of Hasan is that he wishes this potential huge influence into short-sighted decisions that will not only affect the reputation and outlook of the left-wing collective, but also have severe legal and political ramifications. Also, if Hasan is reacting to this video or in any way or capacity, I do expect that at some degree, even to my own detriment. Hasan is not precisely someone who's interested in promoting my content, at least not if it's heavily critical of him, and I do expect a negative reaction, even though that's not the intention I have. I believe Hasan and his fans will do anything they can in bad faith to try and censor this video by nefarious means, either by dunking the metrics with severe dogpiling and silencing the metrics of it, or either by more nefarious means, which could possibly include a DMCA takedown or similar, and I'm definitely ready to have to fight it tooth and nail. So, yeah, fun indeed. I'm not obviously arguing he doesn't deserve having a lot of money. Of course, even myself deserve a lot of money, and anyone like me will be jealous to have the funds and influence Hasan has. But that's not my point, because the ways he earns that money and influence is pretty much unethical in the sense that he exploits leftist talking points, leftist personalities, and leftist viewers while pretending he's one of the worker class leftists, which he's really not. He's just a rich boy with $1 million mansion, luxury cars, and items. And the problem is that he doesn't practice what he preaches because of his reckless spendings and the way he does his reckless spendings. Hassan, in this sense, is not right to represent socialism because he's anything but a socialist. He's the very capitalist he claims not to be. I've been pointing out again, for instance, about how he donated a substantial amount of money to the Amazon labor union, and granted, the only existed proof is a Business Insider article. Funny that. But, well, where there's a tiny, tiny mention of Hassan donating such an amount of money to the union. What if I told you that this money is not of his own pocket? If you remember fondly, the way Hassan accumulated such donated wealth was through merch sales at ideology.shop, a site run by Hassan and Warren Gems Incorporated, the latter being a for-profit business interested in leveraging merch sales for a whole plethora of content creators and brands, even those who don't necessarily align with Hassan's supposed politics. It's incredibly suspicious that Hassan had to rely on his viewers and fans' money instead of his own to donate funds to the Amazon Labor Union. And I feel this as also a recurrent practice when streamers running charity fundraisers. When asked for proof normally if Hassan has even contributed to his own charity fundraisers with his own money, I just get responses to just whataboutism, goalpost moves, and other attacks of characters saying, oh, you're just a hater. People also point out how he donated to a diverse range of charities personally. For instance, one charity stream where he personally donated $40,000 himself. That's a lot of money, isn't it? You wouldn't donate such an amount of money in your life, peasant. Hassan earns a trimester in 2021 above $2 million USD. In contrast, Hassan's Hollywood mansion costs about over another $2 million. He also bought a near $200,000 2022 Porsche Taycan. Oh no! People realize I spend more on reckless luxury items. Quick, I'll donate $100,000 to a Ukraine relief fund so people forget my reckless luxury spendings and the money I spend on video games. Oh, no, sorry. He took a 30-year mortgage on a $2.7 million property, so it's basically $10,000 a month for 30 years. Say, how's your math doing? How's Hassan's math doing? Because I'm pretty sure it's still above the original price of the property, 2.7 million US dollars. And that's it has to consider possibly interest rates. Like Hassan is spending more than the same amount of money in as $2.7 million spread across 30 years. Hello? I know what a mortgage is? I wasn't born yesterday? I'm not surprised how Hassan fans have failed to pick up the patterns, either because Hassan keeps telling them a bunch of sweet little lies, or either because they're full on copium. If you don't pick up on the patterns of cheapness Hassan has when it comes to these charities and fundraisers, you definitely have a problem, and I'm definitely not the problem for pointing it out. For him, you're nothing more than a peasant, willing to spend their money or that can't afford basic needs on donating or subbing to the stream, thinking it will help support the channel. However, this is pretty much like building a foundation on a building that already has an enormous, solid, and indestructible foundation. What is the point, really? Your donation money goes mostly on him spending the money on luxury cars and items in another mansion, so gobble it up, you clown! Sure, the way he earns that enormous amount of money is by spreading ideas of communism and socialism to his viewers. But again, the points of view he spawns on his streams are nothing new. They're the same recycled leftist talking points that common sense leftists have been saying for decades. One only lucky enough to be boosted up by a rich bourgeois spoiled brat in a mansion. The honest problem, for the most part, is not the message itself. Anyone can say it and it's fine by itself. Even I can do it. The problem, though, lands on Hassan not usually practicing on what he preaches, not knowing what he's talking about, or simply being a really awful at making these arguments. The end result is people like me not taking him seriously, so Hassan misrepresents the left as a bunch of champagne socialists who only serve as the caricature the right wing claims we are. Remember the ye old Che Guevara t-shirts and merchandise that were used to be sold in stores? People criticized them for treating the idea of revolution or socialism as a mere consumed product, ready for white liberals to gobble it up like hot chips. Hassan, in a similar fashion, treats this idea of socialism as a brand or as a mere consumer product, ready for the terminally online doomer fanbase to gobble it up the same way. Some people keep telling me, but you didn't donate anything to the ALU or nor any other charity. I do have a rebuttal to that one. I am most of the time broke, and I need to financially cover my own living expenses or whatever they may be, because sometimes I have myself to feed and survive, so that's basically my top priority, like anyone else's. Two, that's an argument so irrelevant that it's considered shifting the goalposts so much it's in another field. How am I morally superior to Hassan by just possibly donating at all, if not donating more than Hassan, to any of the charities Hassan has supposedly contributed to? I will be like many of his fans and viewers who he relies on to spend their much needed life savings on something Hassan doesn't give a flying rat about, and at least to put his own money on, and not just the bare minimum of breadcrumbs that will constitute a significant donation from him. I might even ask, do you donate to the ALU yourselves? I'm pretty sure you did, as Hassan told you. Otherwise, it'll be a shame and your argument, according to your made up ethical rules, will fall moot, don't you think? In the words of Dark Piper IU, Hassan's house will always be baffling, not just due to the exploitation and hypocrisy that paid for it, but that willingly damaged the social perception of socialists and fed into stereotypes because he saw the sacrifice of not owning a mansion and Porsche as too great of a burden. It's not just the way Hassan spends money that's the problem here, but how he earns it. You might be familiar with all these clips and channels that he supposedly doesn't get run by himself or to earn revenue from, despite the fact that you paid these channels editors a substantial amount of compensation for the work. If Hassan says that he doesn't want to bother putting this much effort in YouTube, why then does he still let these fan channels expand his influence all over YouTube itself? And it's not just about generating YouTube views that direct him to the stream nearly all the time. It's also his Twitch streams reacting lazily to content he's stalling to his 60,000 concurrent viewers. One thing is earning capital, but another is earning social capital, the thing that many of these grifters crave even if there's no monetary incentive behind what they do. Hassan knows he's earning a lot of social capital here with all these fan channels, so he networks with them like that. It's a left hustler's university approach if I ever saw anything like it. Hassan knows he treats other content creators he reacts to like competition. It's no wonder why all these fan channels tend to steal the spotlight from the original videos he reacts to, often being spammed incessantly in a content mill fashion on a daily basis. People usually complain about content mill tap channels, where they vomit content on platforms like YouTube in a spammy manner in a daily basis. But let's face it, Hassan and other streamers like these are basically as well content mills or content farms. If it wasn't clearly evident how they have to pull daily clips or VODs on YouTube and other platforms through literal slave labor of editors churn out as daily slop. It is more evident that when you know Hassan is as well a React Andy who most of the time tweets the content who reacts to as airtime filler, oftentimes leaving his chair XQC style to take a pee while the video keeps playing. People will go and point to this easy response as, aha, it's just fair use. Fair use means the content has to be transformative, and this ain't it, chief. Sure, Hassan makes a few bits of commentary, but these feel like they add nearly nothing of transformative value to the content itself he's reacting to. And even if fair use still applies to this, doesn't mean that using this legal copyright loophole is even ethical in the first place, considering how he treats the content he reacts to as if it was an airtime filler or jingling keys in the faces of his gullible audience. Oftentimes, even, a lot of the content creators he reacts to are not fairly compensated, not even financially, for their content being stolen. And at most, one of these fan channels will put the link in the description, the section of the video that nobody looks into. And Hassan he wouldn't even dare to post a link on his chat, lest he will want to lose a minimum fraction of his audience to watch that video. And no, surely a small bump in the views on a video isn't enough compensation. We sure didn't forgive reaction channels like Jinx for this sort of stuff, but we sure as hell are going to forgive people like Hassan for this. Oh no, it's fine, because Hassan somehow is a socialist. That makes him good. Except he's really not, because he's willing to exploit content like this. That makes him more of a capitalist than an actual socialist. Let's face it anyway, nearly no one will agree on having their content reacted by Hasan. And this has been proven multiple times since it's clearly demonstrated that all Hasan achieves is stealing views on the videos he reacts to, treating it as unpaid labor. And I bet your ass that Hasan loves unpaid labor, which in multiple countries like the ones in the EU is illegal. You might be aware that here at JMAA TV, we make a weekly stream called The Weekly Though, and it's usually a stream where I react to the news on the sort, a bit like Hassan does before going on and playing Call of Duty or something. The issue here, though, is that we still have to tread carefully while we're walking eggshells on what constitutes to be fair use of the fair use copyright loophole. I lately sure don't react to other people's content as much as our own, because if we do react to other people's content, we want it to be compensated and not as act as a replacement product to their content. Hassan instead dedicates a huge chunk of 3 hours or more of every one of his streams to react on content. And he's not even just walking on eggshells. He's already happily strolling by a minefield. And this might eventually have some legal ramifications that, okay, maybe Hassan will come out financially unscathed from, but will have huge legal repercussions on what that still that are detriment to the whole online ecosystem, especially for everyone else who isn't Hassan, XQC, or any other of these rich React Andy clowns. I can bet your sorry asses there will be a point where Hassan will fuck up in copyright terms so badly, legislations and lobbyists will jump to everyone else's jugular, making the internet a more ripe space for corporate censorship in the name of copyright and corporate interests. And take that as my soothsaying of the day, because it will happen at some point and will be all Hassan's fault. Mark my fucking words. If the apocalyptic prospect of Hassan screwing up copyright law due to his own incompetence for the detriment of everyone else who can afford a lawyer, at least is not a good one, is not enough, wait until you see what implications Hassan's support atrocious, non-nuanced views will have on the political scene. Political extremism on both sides is a bit of a doozy, because either way it is dominated by terminally online, mentally ill lunatics who will love the worst of the worst of dictatorships or terror as long as it aligns with either the left wing or right wing views. Look, I'm a self proclaimed leftist, but I'm no tanky. I'm no Hamas supporter. I'm neither a silly bus burning anarchist. I'm just a regular trans woman, she, her pronouns, by the way, who has a normal leftist political views regarding anarchism in general, rather common sense anarchism rather than the mentally unhinged anarchism LARPing that they think I will be into. But I will definitely compromise even for political systems that are equal, fair, and good for the working class in a way that treats regular people like me with dignity. I learned to be that because I am not just the label of anarcho-communist. I recognize that I am the amalgamation of mostly leftist political views that don't require a specific label. The political compass is also a fucking deranged lie. Change my mind! Hassan, on the other hand, doesn't understand nuance. At least he pretends to not understand nuance, because you might guess that the thing that gets him the most views, hence more money, is to pretend to have such extremist leftist views that is willing to not leave room for empathy for a diversity of people. One such particular case, for instance, is when he mocked a 60-year-old businessman for getting robbed and vandalized in mass by a whole gang, making all sorts of whataboutisms about how local media is bias against black people, or downplaying the assault saying, oh, it's just a $3 bag of Doritos, when in reality they stole more. A lot more. In one instance, he wouldn't even quit, making everything about so-called white supremacy, often using people of color as tools for his virtue signaling, which, in all honesty, is pretty horrid. Take his issue on the Israel-Palestine conflict, one that is so complicated to unravel, but when it comes to civilians, it's neither black and white, but instead a whole bunch of shades of gray when it comes to morality. We all acknowledge both the Zionist government and Hamas are bad, bloodthirsty monsters, but even then, they have their reasons to why they're bad, bloodthirsty monsters. After all, they're still human beings with thoughts who are not all fucking robots. Hassan will call the people of Israel, however, a bunch of bloodthirsty monsters, as well as other people who do not support his pro Palestine views for some other reason, because he doesn't understand nuance. He doesn't get that even in Israel's side. There are civilian victims as well as in Gaza's Palestinians who are not Hamas, as he holds to his anti Israel horseshit, even if that means him downplaying the terrorism of Hamas. The problem with this is that even if he pretends to have such extreme leftist views for engagement and rich baiting, is that it draws people into believing a whole bunch of unhinged shit. And don't get me wrong, I support Palestine, but here's the catch: I don't support Hamas. This obviously goes hand in hand with the way he makes his reaction content, often leading him not understanding the full video and leaving him making an argument or opinion he has no idea about, when most of these videos he lives playing while he's away from his chair, which can lead to a plethora of really equally bad takes. How the hell can Hassan form an informed opinion even by not only attempting the outrage baiting constantly on his political streams, but also by not even bothering watching the full video? This is dangerous because these fans take Hassan's opinions literally as theirs most of the time, spreading a dangerous extremism and an uninformed ideology which can have political ramifications. In another kind of twist, Hassan is a bit like Sassel here in Spain, but for politics. Oftentimes he cherry picks news articles that exactly align with his pretended worldview and criminalizes other news articles that supposedly disagree with his narrow political point of view. And that's not a good look. And it's not just that. Oftentimes Hassan has been found contradicting himself. He called the boycott of Howard's legacy useless, and okay, maybe I get the point. Boycotts, if not well organized, cannot affect the bottom line of the brands that are boycotting. But it is still an interesting way to raise awareness about a particular issue. Here, it is also to raise awareness about J.K. Rowling's transphobia and how does that link into their own properties like Harry Potter. Hassan thinks this boycott is useless and that it might be fine. If it wasn't for the fact that he instead called for the boycott of Starbucks and other companies supported by Israel, after so much back and forth with the chat, after so much goalpost shifting, he has no solid standards of what to boycott and what not to boycott. The point of boycotting Howard's legacy as well is to hurt J.K. Rowling's bottom line, because let's face it, J.K. Rowling still owns that game as the owner of the Harry Potter IP and has certain control in it enough to get a cut of the game's revenue. This has somehow passed over Hassan's head, and yet he contradicts himself when he thinks that boycotting Starbucks is better than the Wizard game. For some other reason, Hassan doesn't really think a person like J.K. Rowling will have a bazillion connections with other harmful TERFs, including tough legislators who will be happy to listen to Rowling's diatribe and base future anti-trans legislations on that. Hassan is often found flip-flopping between contradictions quite a bit, alongside with boosting extremist messages that don't usually align with reality, because most of the time he's not paying attention to what he's talking about. Hassan is pretty much like the Alex Jones of the left, often rich baiting for the sake of his own profit and nothing else, so he can sell his shit either in the form of merch sales, donations, or subsidies to a channel so he can buy expensive luxury items. Do you really think Alex Jones believes in the shit he says in InfoWars? Why do you think he keeps such a profitable business until now so he can sell enough man pills to get himself some shitty Rolex watches? Hassan sells you his pretend ideology alongside his merch possibly so he can afford the mansion, the luxury cars, and jewels. It's not really Alex Jones' tier Rolex watches, but I find it very similar in behavior. Just basically remember that this guy does not give a shit about what he preaches on his streams. If he did really care about what he preaches, he wouldn't be such a shitty socialist to the point of exploiting literal unpaid labor, stealing content non-stop from other creators, paying literal breadcrumbs to charities, including ones in Gaza, by the way, when he could basically make a much higher impact by being able to afford more and spending more money on luxurious Hollywood lifestyles than in actual charities. Extremist points of view, especially coming from people like Hassan or Alex Jones, have a dire political consequences, especially starting at the political discourse, which plays into eventual legislations and a sort from politicians who agree with these deranged points of view that hurt the end citizen, the average Joe and Jane, more than it does to those in power, politicians, or corporations. I think I made it evidently clear on the terms of copyright issues Hasan implies will cause, that Hasan's lack of self awareness and complete incompetence will have serious legal and political consequences that will affect everyone else but those with enough money to sort themselves through the swamp, like the people in charge of governments or corporations, or even Hasan himself, who still is a millionaire and can at least afford pretty expensive lawyers. It will most likely kickstart a butterfly effect where Hassan flaps his wings in the wrong way and the rest have to suffer a tsunami of epic proportions. Hassan usually does this sort of extremist views for the sake of generating engagement on his streams and content. Do you really think he doesn't know what he's doing? He doesn't give a shit about the consequences of this might have on the legal or political scene because he can just get away with it unscathed, unaffected by the problems that will only affect poor people because he's got millions in his pocket. I doubt there was convinced any Hassan stan to stop giving donations or money to Hassan himself because, I mean, look at you. But you will come with all sorts of shifting the goalposts and whataboutism instead of acknowledging genuine criticisms of your golden calf. But if I have the chance to convince anyone to stop doing so, hear me. Stop giving your engagement or money to Hassan. Save the world from a nearly inevitable, painful fate for you and your loved ones. Trust me. Hassan does not tolerate criticism, like at all. If anything, nearly all the time, he will deflect any sort of criticism he gets into a whole myriad of whataboutisms, shifting the goalposts and other sorts of personal attacks, often even calling his critics a myriad of personal attacks. Neither does Hassan have a sense of self awareness most of the time, and the irony of his is that he'll criticize others for literally the same stuff he does on a regular. He went after reaction channels of yore, but he's obviously not better than them in terms of reaction content. Usually calls it the videos criticizing him not better than his own entertaining videos. He has the ego of the size of the sun, and yet feels insecure whenever viewership is low, according to his own words. This might be the recipe for a Wings of Redemption type of disaster, that the moment he gets mocked at for his own incompetence at basic stuff, he blames everyone and everything else but himself. He calls his critics trolls or drama farmers, despite videos like this proving that they are contrary to drama farming. People in this chat, however, whenever they have a genuine criticism of Hassan, get banned all the time from chat, and Hassan probably bans more people than Wins of Redemption himself. As well as deflecting criticism, Hassan often engages in shifting the goalposts and such when facing such. And such as his response to Willie Mack's show when he got the news reporting wrong on a 13-year-old who stabbed 3 people to death in Gaza, who got detained and yelled at, and Willie called Hassan out for it. Hassan just basically called Willie a drama farmer and a person who enjoys seeing children tortured, often guilt-tripping Willie into trying to make him think he's actually a bloodthirsty monster like the Zionist government. Make better content, says Hassan, while producing reaction content slop that is lazily put together through his live streams and an unpaid intern editor pulling out clips for his bazillion channels. Fan channels. Hassan has literally zero self awareness. And the worst part about this is that he wants to surround himself in a bubble of yes men constantly defending him and protecting him from criticism. Such is the case I had when I pointed out that I'm generally disgusted with Hassan when he's mentioned to be a litmus test of internet politics. Criticism of Hassan, although, save for a few exceptions, transcend political sides. It's more of a situation where you're either writing Hasan Piker or you're either acknowledging that Hassan is a terrible person to represent socialism. And given the downward trend of Hassan's viewership, it seems the latter might ring more true to more people at this point. In the case of him responding to Dark Piper AU, he nearly never, and always poorly, addresses the criticisms towards his React content. Hassan always treats Piper like a pesky troll who's having a hissy fit for some reason. Narcissists, especially internet narcissists, tend to have this sort of pattern of behavior to deflect criticism, to blame everyone else but themselves for their mistakes, and so on. Oh no, I'm not wrong. You're just some child murderer and a troll. This also applies to his own understanding of politics, which is a particular version of the so-called Dunning-Kruger effect. Like people who are not knowledgeable in a certain field at some point grow too much confidence in the idea that they know more than they actually do. Hasan has grown too much confidence in knowing more about politics than what he actually knows. Meanwhile, his fans, what remains of them, treat him as an irreverent personality, incapable of doing any wrong to anyone, or meanwhile, his fans, or what remains of them, treat him as an inherent personality, incapable of doing any wrong to anyone or anything, so the narcissist of Hasan will trap himself into his own safe space bubble, nearly immune to criticism, because if you do criticism towards him, least you can get is his rabid fans white knighting him with cape and sword, doing literally the same criticism deflection than he does, because somehow his fans are a reflection of his personality, and most of the time they live in his sort of denial of criticism from all sides. His fans spend too much time doing damage control for Hasan, owning the point of distribution to those, so those who do the labor that generates his income deserve nothing, and its subsequent business model around it, alongside his hyper-consumerist lifestyle. Those are also the words of Dark Piper you, and to think about it, it's pretty insane. It's no strange because, considering he's a rich millionaire, it reflects the spoiled personality of Hasan as someone who has never been challenged in his own life nor did have any life struggles. And he can basically tell you, oh, he lived in Turkey, was bullied, etc., etc. But this has not much more possible to hide than what Hasan tells on his streams and whatnot. Unusual piece of so-called evidence that his fans point me out to contradict my points usually boils down to, oh, he said on the stream, here's a clip, blah, 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 blah. For which I think a lot more people should be skeptical about. We live in a time period of manufactured consent, and those who are above the 99% of mortals who are too poor to rewrite history anyways. This might be the case with Hasan, as he tends to reflect as well as some other criticisms with a typical Turkey sub-stories and the sort. Be ready when the truth comes out, because let's face it, that immense millionaire wealth does not come from nowhere. And considering he's being the young Turk's favorite, we will eventually find out if the Turkey sub-story, alongside whatever he says about his mortgage and all, even holds ground. There's a little tiny caveat I have to make about Hasan though. Oftentimes a lot of his fans, when presenting or attempting to present proof of anything Hasan supposedly did, they keep telling me a lot of times the same old tale. Oh, Hasan said it in his stream. Here's a clip of Hasan saying it in our stream. This is a very weak piece of evidence though, because it seems that Hasan foot soldiers are taking whatever Hasan says at face value, whether it is on a stream clip or an interview or anything. Anyone who knows me personally knows that I'm an honest person with integrity, and many of them believe that I have my obvious reasons within all my possible honesty why I left the alt-right. However, it doesn't mean you have to always give people like me the benefit of the doubt. I even have some slurs bouncing on my head sometimes, even if it's not my intention to say them. And that's why you should be skeptical of any streamer or on content creator personality, at least for their public appearance. We lived and live times where a huge diversity of content creators like Hasan have at least something to hide behind their public influencer facade. These public figures have a public image to keep, so it's fine you should be skeptical, because we all know that when someone lies on the internet, the truth will come out eventually. And I'm still somewhat surprised that after cases like these happening all over the span of the entire history of YouTube and Twitch, people are still surprised most of the people they admire are conniving liars. Why do you think people like Pokemon do that little cutesy fake voice? They have the public image to keep and a lot of stuff and thoughts to hide. Everyone, myself included, has secrets. So when I ask, for instance, for a piece of evidence about Hasan donating to LAU, I don't think a clip of him saying he did is enough. Considering there's a little to no evidence on Google on whether he actually even used his own pocket money, it is a flimsy evidence and it borders on trust me bro tier memes. Often, criticism of Hasan has met with his fans angrily clapping back at said criticism in a very hostile manner. And this might be not only a reflection of the attitude of idolizing content creators and parasocial relationships, but also a reflection of Hasan's very particular personality. Hasan is never in good faith to his critics. His bad faith has gone so far to make personal attacks against his critics, or to pull off usual ad hominems because he thinks anyone who doesn't think he's the coolest, raddest, most perfect, inerrant person in Twitch is basically a Nazi, a fascist, or even gets usually dumped in a misgendering, like his fans tend to do where they do the Major Arlene tactic of dumping me somehow with the cis men because they can read a fucking Twitter bio for 1 second and inform themselves, or because I don't look trans enough for them, which honestly borders on transphobia. I came out as trans. I didn't suddenly decide I was trans woman out of nowhere, despite the fact that I was conditioned by myself and my surroundings to think I was a cis man nearly all my life. And that happens as well with plenty other trans people. Let's remember Hasan's biggest contributions though. The America deserved 9/11 Hasan. The kill those motherfuckers in a video game Hasan. Do you think this reflects even on his own gullible fanbase? Hasan neither offers any valuable solutions to the constant problems he presents on his own narrative. He just makes everyone miserable for the sake of engagement, and as a result, his fanbase are equally miserable losers who wail eternally in their own misery, all the while Hasan profits off of people agreeing with him. In a podcast with Ethan Klein, he even refused to give a solution to bring the so-called socialism to America, and people brought him the subject of him leading a revolution, to which he didn't even bother giving them a viable solution for that. Hasan's toxicity is often not just represented by his own constant dragging of his audience to misery, but also by his constant hate boner for America, which could be understandable since he's originally Turkish, but the irony here is that he relied on America's capitalism to be successful, got his parents to pay him college for like a privileged spoiled brat, rubbed shoulders with his rich uncle Cenk, and even paid off a $3 million mansion and an expensive Porsche. All in the while, he brings even more negativity to his audience, bringing them down and demoralizing them with his nonsense propaganda, which is unsurprising because, isn't that the point of a capitalist, to demoralize any opposition? At JMAA TV, we try our best to come up with at least one moral we can learn from in every video we can make, or even a broad generalization of a solution to some bigger problem faced by a video's topic. And we do this for mere ethical standards. Hasan fails to do that because he relies on the rich baiting and negativity for money and views, which again falls in line with the whole Alex Jones of the left kind of thing. And the sad thing about this is that his fans look up to Hasan as a role model of a possible revolution in socialism, often reflecting this sort of toxicity. Hasan knows how to exploit this type of parasocial relationship with his utter dramatics and performance so he can stack up more millions for his upper consumerist addiction. Like I said previously, Hasan is a brand of socialism, is nothing more than a consumer product, a mere corruption of the very concept of socialism for the sake of distorting it and twisting it into a mere intellectual equivalent of Coca-Cola and Doritos, something that you just consume like a drug to keep you down for a lifetime of supply availability, and Hasan has kept his fan base hooked up on this drug. I fear for the future generations that will look up to people like Hasan as a so-called revolutionary, aping his words, aping his actions, and generally emulating his fake doomer ideology that he exploits for profit in capitalism. It will bring possibly dire political consequences to our future generations. If it wasn't clearly evident, we were dealing with really, really terminally online people who didn't know better. I'm pretty sure it's pretty easy to downplay the ethical dilemmas of content creators and streamers under the excuse of amateurishness. And everyone's just like, oh, holding content creators to ethical standards? Oh no, they're just amateurs with webcams and Blue Yeti microphones. Nobody already takes them seriously. The reality of this, however, is that content creators have become not just professional with whole teams, paid or unpaid, under them and real businesses running, but also they've become a referent for many people online. And all they had to keep was a facade of public image. The moral grandiose these people have is mainly a mask to masquerade the real skeletons in the closet these people have. And let's face it, even people like myself have secrets to hide. But people like Hasan have been getting away with this sort of problems for a really long time, no matter the amount of criticism they get thrown away on the way. And this is true because Hasan is still the biggest leftist referent on the internet, if it wasn't for the fact that he's starting to lose a following slowly. So it might seem there's a real damage to do when they are already being held accountable for their actions by the public. And my hope with this video is, as a fellow leftist who had the misfortune of belonging to the alt-right before escaping it, is to cement his accountability and put the final nail in the coffin of Hasan Piker's prospects and hope anybody else can learn from everyone's mistakes. The lesson we can learn here is, be skeptical of any content creator with a public PR facade, and always be vigilant for any pertinent red flags regarding your favorite content creators, assuming already you know already to not idolize them. Good night.